Amazing, we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Zahir Mammadzada. I'm the Strategic Data Analyst and San Francisco Fellow, and my co-presenter.
I'm Denise Schmidt. I am the Collections and Cataloging Manager at San Francisco Public Library. Thank you for joining us.
Today, we're going to talk about data and San Francisco Public Library, in specific, what research, analytics, and strategy division does to support SFPL with data. And this is our agenda, just a quick look. We'll touch on who we are and what we do. Next, Denise will share with you about real-time monitoring of circulation and visits. Next, we'll touch on COVID-19 metrics that we track, two examples of it. I will share with you a little bit about what we do for the community outreach and how we use data for that. And I will share some other metrics with you.
So first, we'll start with the background on RSA, as we call it.
Yes. So the San Francisco Public Library, we've been collecting circulation, visits, reference questions, spending data for decades. But various units have gathered their data independently, so it was not in a centralized location. So the Research Strategy Analytics RSA division was created in 2017 to leverage existing institutional data and champion data-driven decision-making into the operational fabric of SFPL. What RSA does, we provide in-house technical support to the library's other divisions, acting as an internal consultant in areas of performance measurement and management, quantitative and qualitative surveys, and outcomes evaluation, strategic planning, marketing and programmatic analytics, data visualization, and data best practices, all to promote greater efficiencies within the organization. We have RSA has 4 positions, one of which is currently vacant. We have the Chief Analytics Officer who manages and oversees the division. We have Data Manager and Senior Data Analysts who curate SFPL data and produce relevant work products. And a San Francisco Fellow, myself, who provides support to ongoing projects during the 1-year fellowship. And next, Denise will share with you about our monitoring of business and circulation.
Yes, so one thing that SFPL and probably every library, public library that exists, have been measuring their actual physical visits, who is visiting the library. And one of the things we didn't do in the past was actually combining all the data into these really cool color charts, which here is showing over, starting at fiscal year 2013, going to the present, how each branch location contributes to our overall physical action, all the visits that we have. You can see, just as a general trend, we have been trending downward, but different branches have contributed different amounts. It's really cool to see them all against each other. This is something that we never had until we had an RSA unit. We were just looking at Excel spreadsheets mostly. Then, of course, you can see here that little sad spot where we closed for COVID and how we are eventually, you can notice also in these bars that not all of our branches opened up again at once. We opened the main library alone in August, and gradually over time, as we've recovered staff from the disaster service work they were doing, we have been able to open branches every month. We are still not back to the hour schedule that we had pre-COVID, where every branch was open 7 days a week. We're still trying to get back there. This is a nice clean graph just showing the year-over-year change of visits. Like every public library, I believe, in the country, you can see that we are having declining visits. Every year, it's been going down a little bit. Interestingly, between 2015 and 2019, we also increased our open hours. Before, every branch was not open 7 days a week, but during this time period, we got to the point where every branch at 2019, every branch was open 7 days a week. Every branch was open 3 nights a week. And despite that fact, we still had that kind of gradual decline in visits. And then, of course, 2021, we plummeted. And now we are trying to recover. But you can see how much below our previous numbers we're at in terms of physical visits. It's taken us a while to get back to where we were. This is a cool chart. I like this one because it shows, on average, how we do on the various months of the year compared to the average, right? So we have our average there at 433,411 visits a month. And you can see that our July and August, those are our real power months. Traditionally, I believe that libraries were rather slow in July and August, but Summer Stride, our summer reading program, which starts in June, is really our major push with massive programming. And so we are pulling in more people who, even though it's vacation time and kids aren't in school, they're coming to the libraries because we, in the past, had 2 to 3 children's programs a week at all our branches during the summer. And I do believe that really contributed to the massive visits that we would have during the summer. As a cataloging and collections manager, these kind of charts are nearest and dearest to my heart. As you can see in blue, we have physical circulation, which starting back in 2010, you can see we had some great peaks. We were there very close to 1 million in physical circ, plus this little tiny bit of e-circ when Overdrive was just a baby and we didn't have Hoopla yet, and Access 360 didn't exist yet, and Flipster didn't exist. And then over time, you can see that even though physical circ had continued its slow downward march, our e-circ was really making up the difference. And so that our overall circ right before we closed was really tipping out. We were really getting high there. And then we had the closure for COVID. And then once again, physical circ was zip because no branches were open and it was all e-circ. And then you can see this big leap as we first started opening, the main library opened. We were only doing front door service, and we started with the main alone. And the next month, we only had 4 branches. And this chart doesn't show it, but our biggest regain in physical circ has been juvenile picture books. Parents really came back and were like, we want to get our kids away from a computer. We want our kids looking at books. We want them to have that physical experience with books. And that contributed really largely to our recovery of physical circ. The area that has recovered the least for us in physical is adult nonfiction. Is lagging of all our areas of circ. Adult nonfiction is really, except for cooking books and travel books, they're still good. But our adult nonfiction has still got the longest way to recover. Juvenile circulation has almost gotten back to pre-COVID numbers. It's adult print that we are still waiting to see. And of course, as you can see, our e-circ is still powering along and breaking our budget. This is a lovely, I love this graph. This is a great graph just showing our year-over-year decrease in the physical circ. And right there where we closed and the physical dropped to the basement. And my boss and I were tracking on a weekly basis our e-expenditures because we were frightened that we were going to run out of money, frankly, to handle the explosion of e-circ. Those of you who are in the library field know that e-media, e-print, e-books are not as cheap as print books. And they have, okay, I'm not going to use the word ridiculous, but they have expirations either for total number of circ or length of time. And so they become real budget crushers. So we were monitoring every week our expenditures of E to make sure that even though we were not ordering as much print, we did continue to order print because we didn't want to lose titles that would be important when COVID was over and we reopened. So we were still buying print in a reduced fashion, but our e-budget was absolutely frightening. And we were tracking it every week, how much we were spending and how much we were circing to make sure that we had the money to finish out the fiscal year. This was something that RSA started that we had never had at SFPL before they came along, and this is the virtual visits. We have had door counters since the Stone Age, and so we were very used to and very adept at collecting the data of people who walked through our doors. But what we weren't accounting for were the people who were calling us on the phone, people who were texting us using chat, people who were emailing us, people who were writing us or reading the fact pages. And so RSA was really great in helping us chart, wow, here are these patron interactions that we're having that previously the library was blind to. We didn't see them. We didn't account for them. And especially after we closed to the public in March of 2020, you can see how we had some real highs there as patrons were interacting with us when this was the only way they can interact with us. One of the things that we are going to probably be adding to this would be our interaction with patrons who suggest titles to purchase from us. Currently, we use BiblioCommons as our discovery platform, and our patrons are allowed to suggest titles to us to purchase, which we look up, we see if they meet our selection criteria, and we respond to them to let them know, yes, we're going to buy this, no, we're not going to buy this, this isn't being published for another 6 months, so we can't buy it, or this is a Netflix exclusive, so we can't buy it. So that's even more patron data that I hope in the future. Zahir and I were talking about, it's like, wow, Zahir's like, wow, those are real patron interactions you're having there. Do you even count them? And I was like, no, we just answer them. But Zahir, do you want to add what other things?
Yeah, there's, I agree with you. There's a lot more to add. This is virtual patron interactions is one facet of this. We're also looking at the e-programs, database usage, and the web metrics to really show that trend moving towards the e-circulation. So this is, RSA did this alongside the data analytics community, and this is really new to the library industry altogether. So
yeah,
we're at the beginning stage of this process.
Yeah, it was so funny when he was asking me about title suggestions and patrons writing us and telling us what they wanted us to buy. And he's like, do you track that? And I was like, only in terms of we make sure we answer them, but it actually drives a large part of our work at CDO, Collection Development Office. And no, we've never gotten, we have never tracked it as a patron interaction, though it clearly is, because we're expected to turn them around within 2 weeks and give them an answer, right? It's kind of like a reference question, but it's not. It's an interaction about what our patrons want from us. So then just wanted to give some really, what I consider extremely interesting analytic work we did about COVID-19. Now, I don't know what library systems you all come from, but at San Francisco, the county and city of San Francisco, if you sign on as a public employee, you also sign on to become what they call a disaster service worker. And it's a requirement, and it's part of what you do when you sign a contract to work for any public agency in the city and county. And so, oops, sorry about that. And so we had all, I would say not all of us, but most of us had thought about it. And we're like, yeah, there's going to be an earthquake someday in San Francisco. We're going to have to open our branches because they're retrofitted, and maybe we'll serve food out of our branches, or maybe people will come in and use our internet or whatever. We all knew it was going to happen someday, but I don't think any of us expected it to be a global pandemic. And so sure enough, when the mayor called the city to close us all, we were redeployed. Almost, very few staff. Let's see, what color are the people who kept working? Yellow. You can see this tiny slice of people who were allowed to work remotely because they had to keep things going. Like my unit, we kept ordering books, we kept ordering ebooks, we kept cataloging from home. We did all that work from home. I was coming into the building as well because we kept receiving books. So you can see regular work location. There was a tiny slice of my unit that was still working. We had to have the loading dock open. We had to have receiving open. Books were coming in. We were still ordering books, and we had to have people working in my building to receive it all. But by far, most of our people were deployed as disaster service workers. And they were doing things like working food banks. custodians were helping keep the hospitals clean. Our security were also working at COVID isolation hotels. So were librarians, as a matter of fact. Librarians and other technical staff were doing COVID contact tracing. There were testing sites that our staff were helping to run. And then later, once the vaccination existed, they were running the vaccination sites. So a huge, huge portion of our 900 staff were busy doing other work. And they were working for the Department of Public Health. And so it was only over time that people were allowed to come back and start working in a branch, not necessarily the branch that they normally worked at, but a branch. And you can also see this top line here, how we had a steady decline in the number of staff total as people were like, okay, I'm out of here, I'm retiring, or I'm going to go move somewhere else. And we're still trying to hire back all the staff we lost during COVID. This is about a community hubs initiative that was started shortly after the city closed. The school district, the San Francisco Unified School District, closed and converted all their classes to remote learning. And the mayor was extremely concerned about children who did not have the proper situation at home to encourage them to be checked into their school, and maybe they needed more help. And so originally 10 branches were opened as what we called learning hubs. So they kind of repurposed the building and designed it so that it would be as safe as possible for the adult workers and the children who came. And children were logging into their classes at our library branches with adult helpers, and they had a free lunch that was served there, so that the kids who were at most at risk of falling behind were able to have an interactive and people present situation so that they could still do their online classes, but have someone who would help them stay focused on their work, who would give them a nice break, who could talk to them, who could interact with them, who could assist them. So these library branches were some of the last ones to reopen because they were used as community hubs. And now I'm going to pass it on, or am I still going? No, this is you, Zahir. Go for it.
I wanted to talk to you guys about two examples of how we use data to reach out to our patrons and our communities. The first one, as you saw, is patron recovery. We see that the pre-COVID year, we had 244,000 active patrons, whereas we only have 64% of that pre-COVID patrons have returned to libraries. When we look at the new patrons since the COVID and the inactive patrons who came back to our libraries for circulation, when we add them together, we are only at 92% of where we were pre-COVID year. And the second thing we see here is in this pink color right here, we see the physical only circulation, and we see that many of them has not returned. And from the new patrons here on the dark blue color and the inactive patrons pre-COVID in a purple color, we see that they have moved into becoming eCirc only. And we will see that even better in the next slide. In this patron flows, we see first about the moving to eCirc only trend. We see that from the physical only circulating patrons, they have moved, some of them moved to eCirc. From the new patrons and formerly inactive patrons, they have also moved into becoming an eCirc only patrons. And the second thing we see is right here, 88,000 patrons who have not returned. And a big chunk of it, about 70,000 of it was who were previously physical only patrons. And we have built maps for it too, and we see that a lot of people from East Bay, for example, they were physical only patrons and they have not returned. Our marketing team uses this data and the map I mentioned to outreach to folks who has not returned, and they have done that in the past spring, and they are continue to use this data to outreach for patrons. And next, I want to share with you about our community profiles. So we have 28 locations in our library system, and all of them have a different makeup. And we need to know our communities to tailor the services and address needs. These maps are based on the usage, service usage area. We are looking at right now the mission on the dark red and the peripheral branches. In that service area for mission branch, we see that there's a 31% of Spanish-speaking population, whereas the citywide, that's 11%. we see that higher concentration, higher density of Spanish-speaking population. So we know that to gear more of our resources in that direction. What that means in terms of staffing, to place more of our Spanish-speaking staff there, in terms of collections, to have more Spanish-speaking materials. Mm-hmm. And when we look at it in the same slide, you see that Chinese-speaking population is only 4%, and that also informs our collections development team to, to really relocate the resources where there's the interest and the need lies. And the second example quickly is the Bayview branch in the dark red again, and we see that there's a higher concentration of Black population here than the citywide population. So we know that we need to gear more of our resources to serve this community.
Yeah, it certainly affects our collections too. We focus titles of Black interest and Black authors. We send Bayview almost everything we buy because we know that that's where our users are.
And next, I just wanted to quickly touch on a few other metrics and the works we have done. First one being the library, the budget projections for Library Preservation Fund, which is a water-approved fund that was established in '95 and have been approved twice since then. It's a critical portion of our annual budget, and it's going to go in ballot in the fall. So we built different scenarios to understand the impact of this new ballot proposal. We looked at some historical recession data and our own budget data to come up with various scenarios to understand the impact. Next, we are looking at public access to computing sessions, and we also track the Wi-Fi connections. You see, even when our buildings were closed, there's still 5,000 connections were being made to our network daily. And IT uses this data for resource allocation in terms of purchasing, in terms of, for example, purchasing more technology or staffing. And this map is a map of a number of security incidents by location. It's a monthly map that we produce, which allows our security team to look for hotspots and to send more security members in those locations for support. And we do a bunch of other stuff as part of Racial Equity Action Plan. We have done library demographics and racial equity metrics. For facilities, we have done some staff coverage analysis. We do quarterly patron depth analysis for management, open hours assessment, and a big chunk of our work is also focused on survey methodologies and reporting. Internally, we have surveys such as San Francisco City performance measures, and there's a lot of external surveys, as other libraries can relate, such as the PLA, Public Library Association Benchmark Survey.
Yeah, LJ Survey. Yeah, the California State Library Survey. Oh, there's so many. Yeah, there's so many.
And finally, just to quickly touching on challenges. Challenges for me, I see it twofold. One is the patron privacy. At RSA, we value patron privacy highly, and that's SFPL, as proved by our strong privacy policy. But at the same time, with that said, we want to understand how to best serve our population. And sometimes we don't have enough information to analyze that. And the second fold is the data literacy. You see, library industry is relatively new to the advanced data methodologies and tools like Tableau. So we find ourselves not only producing dashboards, but also educating and sharing with our staff on how to use and how to read dashboards. So it just takes a little more time.
Yes, it does.
And with that, I think it's opportune time for questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So Katie, are there any questions for us?
Going to stop sharing.
Michael Lambert's been answering some in the chat, which has been helpful.
Thanks, Michael.
Robin Bishop just asked, how do you handle database usage stats?
Man, we collect them. We surely do collect them. They are hard because so many vendors decide to use a different metric for what you would call a use, right? We collect them. We use them to analyze which databases need more promotion, which databases we calculate the cost per use, and which databases are costing us a lot of money, and do we really want to keep them? So yes, we gather that data monthly, and we use it to assess what we're buying, what we're keeping. When the contracts are coming due, we're looking at the usage. We're conferring with, if it's a specialized database, we're talking to the subject specialists and saying like, okay, this is what this is costing us per use. How do you justify that? So yes, we are always looking at that. We don't, I didn't discuss it here, but yeah, we gather it and we analyze
Thank
it.
you. My question was, I understand you can gather it, but if you say have two databases that may have similar, of course they're not similar, but if you have to decide, sometimes the data the vendor gives is, you know, what is a hit? What is a use? It's very, very different as to what they consider a true, you know, landing on the page and use.
Yes.
So can you shed any insight to anything? I know it's a tough question.
I mean, it's kind of, we're in a somewhat enviable position in terms of we probably subscribe to around 200 databases.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot. We are usually not at the point where it's like we have to cut our budget by 25% and we're going to slash. Yeah, we use them. We use the databases. All the people who are on my e-collections committee, we are users of that database. We're analyzing them. And so we are comparing the hits and whether we consider what the vendor is giving us to be truly relevant. And we definitely, if we feel a vendor is giving us kind of a flaky kind of data, we consider them less highly. I mean, that's a way to get rid of a database if we really feel like they're just kind of giving us BS data. Yeah.
Yeah, because some of them you can automatically download their statistical reports. And these are the ones I find most tricky because what is their definition of?
Yeah, we talk to them.
Okay.
we definitely talk to our vendors, our database vendors, and we grill them on those kind of questions.
So we have about 1 more minute, and Andrea has her hand raised for a question. You want to unmute?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. My question is around, I don't know if it's out of the scope of this, it's around your use of Tableau. Does SFPL have their own Tableau server, or are you sharing that with your city?
SFPL has we have our own Tableau that RSA team uses to build the dashboards and for data visualization.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Of course. Any last minute questions?
I don't see any questions, any more questions.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, if you're not already part of ULC, boy, Urban Library Council, I think it's council. Is it Urban Library Council? That's where
Yes,
I spend
yes.
a lot of my time talking collections. You can find me there.
All right, thank you. I will stop the recording now.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you,
Take care.
everyone. Take care.